we're in a kind of awkward situation where we're having two concurrent meetings. So if you need to. Sorry, that's okay.
No, Madam President, I can speak for Para. So, Jillian Barker, Senior Assistant City Solicitor, I, provide legal counsel to Para for our open meeting acts. Because this is just an informational meeting for Para, they're not gonna be voting on anything that can move forward without a quorum.
Great, so because we have some seats at the table, I'd love to have para board members join us at the table, and Councilwoman Lennon, you can sit over here. Ms. Ray, yeah. Anyone else? All right, and I know, I'm very excited, we have some special guests tonight, so I am happy to turn this over, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and we're excited to hear from you.
Sure. I was just gonna introduce Tina Barr.
Great.
So I'd like to introduce Tina. She's the Director of Training and Education at the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, otherwise known as NACOL. Tina became involved with civilian oversight of law enforcement in 2019 as a member of a grassroots organization in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It's led to the creation of an oversight entity in that city. Tina has extensive experience in social work, public health training, and research with state, private, and nonprofit organizations, and has worked in several capacities as an advocate. We're fortunate to have her here with us tonight to explain the principles of effective oversight and how we can utilize this information to strengthen the support and the work of the parents. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you for that introduction. And good evening, council members, and also everyone from the community here. I appreciate you all being here, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions and sharing some information just about effective principles when it comes to civilian oversight of law enforcement. And I will say that the information that I will address tonight, we meaning NACOL, promulgate effective principles, these 13 very specific principles. And I understand that, or please understand that as I'm talking about these, a lot of these are the ideal, but they are what are known to be effective when it comes to having effective oversight that actually does what the mandate that it sets out for it to do. Having these principles in place increases the likelihood of being able to fulfill the mandates that's required. And so, can you get the presentation here?
Which one is that again?
You go to the bottom.
Right.
To the left, back to the right here.
Right here?
Yeah, thank you. All right. So what I'm going to do is quite simply, I will talk about the benefits of civilian oversight of law enforcement, and then the subsequent slides will each address each of the 13 different principles. And so I will, I'm happy to answer questions as they arise or at the end, whatever you choose. But that's a very simple outline of how the next few minutes are going to go. Essentially, when people hear the term civilian oversight of law enforcement without having a good background about it, or even people who are in some form or another in the world of civilian oversight of law enforcement, it's a very nuanced field. It's very complicated. There are a lot of pieces to it, a lot of moving parts. I will start out by saying that there are approximately 300 oversight entities in this country that we know of, and no two are exactly alike. Because this is a local level process, policy making process, oversight looks very different from city to city. There are some overlapping similarities and authorities from city to city, but just please keep in mind what actually ends up by city is at the will of the city as a whole. And so because of that, it looks different everywhere you go. So you have here, you have an oversight office here, but just keep in mind, every city that has an oversight office may have a different level of staffing, may have actual different levels of authority, meaning the responsibilities that they can carry out. And so everything that I talk about today speaks to regardless of what type of office or oversight mechanism that you have in your city, these are the principles that we promulgate, to create the most effective oversight as possible. All right, so first of all, the benefits of civilian oversight. They benefit all segments of the community. Sometimes there's the false understanding or misconception that civilian oversight of law enforcement is anti-police. The reality is, it seeks to improve community relationships between law enforcement and the community, by virtue of holding, law enforcement agencies accountable, promoting the responsiveness of both law enforcement and oversight to the community. And so when I talk about civilian oversight of law enforcement and the benefits, it's to all segments of the community, okay? When I use the term stakeholders, that's going to be in reference to all segments of the community as well, the general public, law enforcement agencies, nonprofit organizations, local government officials, municipal staff members. And so I am looking at the benefits holistically and stakeholders, in a very holistic manner. So first and foremost, the prevalence or the existence of civilian oversight in a community does protect the rights of individual members of a community, all segments of that community. And so when I talk about rights, that goes to not only legal rights, but constitutional rights, civil rights, and human rights. So through ongoing review, investigation, auditing, or monitoring of alleged police misconduct cases, oversight bodies can identify patterns of rights violations in practice and in policy. And in doing so, if they do identify violations, the oversight body can make recommendations to address them so that they don't occur again. There's a remedy to that. Oversight bodies also ensure greater accountability. There is this term in research called the Hawthorne effect. And so what that essentially means is the idea that if someone is being observed or watched or overseen, a person or an entity or institution, they are more likely to alter their behavior because they are aware that someone is watching and overseeing. So in the simplest of terms, if you know someone's watching and kind of overseeing your work, what you're doing, you're more likely to follow the rules and to be in compliance with what you're supposed to be doing. Because you know someone's watching, it's a very simple concept, okay? So in the world of civilian oversight, if there is oversight in a community, the oversight body essentially serves as the observer. So it's an added layer to ensure fairness, objectivity, and thoroughness of misconduct investigations, as well as ensuring law enforcement compliance with policies and state and local and federal laws. So it supports effective policing, okay? So more often than not, regardless of what cities I've worked with, what communities I'm working with in the area of civilian oversight of law enforcement, I can think it's safe to say that the majority of cases that are brought before, or cases that complaints are filed when it comes to alleged police misconduct, they actually do not find misconduct. So they uphold that the officer acted in accordance with policy. And so in those cases, they actually support, or at the very least acknowledge that the officer acted in accordance with policy. Now, that's not to say that all policy, or no policy should ever be amended or changed, because the reality is that yes, there are plenty of cases where an officer in fact did act according to policy. However, oversight body recognized that there was a flaw in the policy and have made recommendations to change that policy. And police departments in many cases have been agreed to that and made those changes. So it does affect support effective policing. Another way it does that is many oversight bodies have a portal, just as citizens can file complaints regarding police misconduct. They can also, they have a portal that, or a mechanism where citizens can also file commendations, or they can acknowledge something good that a police officer has done. So in that case, again, it supports effective policing. Builds bridges between the public and law enforcement. And so essentially, oversight bodies do represent the interests of the public. Okay? primarily focused on the safety and well-being of the community. And so they serve as a go-between in a lot of cases between the community and law enforcement and vice versa. And I will say this, oversight bodies are in a tough position oftentimes, because if they're doing their job well, then at some point, or usually at every point along the way, somebody's not going to be happy with the body itself. It can be law enforcement, it can be a member of the community, but this is not a body that everyone is going to be satisfied with everything that they're doing all the time. There have to be hard decisions that are made, unpopular decisions that are made, and so keep the oversight bodies in place because it is a tough position to be in. Increases public trust and confidence in police. Now, if everything is going as it should be, this is the idea, by virtue of working cooperatively with each other, then the natural byproduct is increased trust and confidence in police. And I'm a realistic person, and that's why I say if everything is going as it should be. Okay? I understand the reality of situations and the ideal. And then finally, helps manage risk. So in the simplest of terms, when we think of a city or county managing risk, oftentimes there's a dollar figure attached to it. So if your city has ever been the subject of a lawsuit regarding police misconduct, the presence of civilian oversight is a mechanism that can possibly prevent that from happening. Many, I would hazard to say most cases of police misconduct that are filed by community members oftentimes start with feeling disrespected by law enforcement, some kind of encounter. I've looked at these numbers in various cities and I see that that's a factor in most of the cases. And so if there is a mechanism to prevent that encounter from a simple encounter where someone feels disrespected in their interaction, that is actually a preventative thing from it rising to the occasion of a lawsuit or some kind of serious incident, right? An interaction, pretty minor, escalating into something where there's an actual use of force, which we definitely don't like to see. So civilian oversight, the presence of it, is a way to help minimize risk, to manage risk. Theoretically, the more oversight becomes proactive in the community, the more risk is minimized. And so by that, I mean that historically, oversight has been a reaction to something that has happened in the city. Police violence, a critical incident, something that has happened and the community has responded and reacted. Okay? Oversight has been around for the concept for about 100 years. Going back to, I think, the 1930s, the Wickersham Commission, which was established way back by President Hoover, all the way up to the Kerner Commission in the 60s during the civil rights. As far back as the 30s, the 60s, both presidential commissions, when they issued their reports, which were commissioned to look into police-related violence and civil unrest related to racial violence that was going on during both times. Both of the presidential commissions acknowledge the need for independent external bodies that oversaw misconduct complaints against police. So oversight, although it's been in the news a lot more since the murder of George Floyd, it's been around for a long time, the concept. Right? All right, so theoretically, it started out more reactionary, but what we're moving towards in the last couple decades, since around the 90s, 2000s, is a more proactive approach to oversight. So that's not waiting until something happens and someone files a complaint of alleged misconduct. That is still needed, but what we're seeing more and more is that there are auditing functions and monitoring functions of law enforcement practices, procedures, and operations, just in general, of the law enforcement agency. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what's required to do that. But essentially by being proactive, not waiting for an incident to happen. It's essentially saying that in order to prevent incidents from happening, incidents of police misconduct and escalations to heights that we don't want to happen, there should be regular ongoing monitoring of what's going on. So here's the next slide is just simply the 13 principles for effective oversight. And in subsequent slides, I will go over each one with a little more information. So I'm going to skip this slide. All right. Principle 1 is independence. And so this is a critical factor in the role of civilian oversight of law enforcement. The level of independence that an oversight entity has determines whether or not that oversight body is deemed to be a legitimate organization in the eyes of the public, as well as all stakeholders overall. And so when we think of independence in terms of civilian oversight, we think about structural independence, political independence, and then operational independence. So structural independence means that there is a clear and distinct separation administratively and organizationally from the overseeing law enforcement agency. So the oversight body should not be under the same, within the same organization as the police department in any way. Political independence refers to the extent that political actors can influence or affect oversight operations. So we know that there are a lot of oversight boards and commissions and even staff positions. This is, again, keep in mind, it varies from city to city where oversight is. But oftentimes, political figures do have a say so in who sits on boards and commissions and whether or not someone is reappointed in their position. So political independence, think of in terms as degrees or along the spectrum, okay? And so political independence can be assessed in terms of the establishing authority. So we know with executive orders come directly from mayors or the heads of a local municipality. Charters require a vote by the citizens of the community, and then an ordinance is the policymaking process at this level. And so if there is the authority of an oversight body is established by ordinance and charter, it's a little bit more hard to change as opposed to it's the vote that the will of the people, it's been voted or it's gone through the political or the policy making process. Political independence can also be assessed in terms of the legal counsel, right? Does the oversight body share legal counsel with the police department, which is often the case, or does it have independent legal counsel? So that's one of the ways it can be assessed. Now, what we do know, data from 2021 show that about 26% of oversight bodies in this country have independent legal counsel, so the majority share counsel with city government. Okay. But again, that can be a conflict. And so in some cases, I am aware that some cities have in their ordinance that if there is a conflict, right, there is a dispute between the police department and the oversight body, then the police department retains the counsel of the city attorney, and the oversight body actually gets independent counsel. Political independence can also be assessed in terms of the level of influence that political actors can have on staffing, the composition and oversight. So that's what I mentioned earlier. Hiring and firing, the appointment and removal of the volunteer board and commission members, and then also the budget. And I'm going to talk more about this in the upcoming slide. But when we're talking about the budget in terms of independence, is there an apolitical process that determines the budget for the oversight office, or is it through discretionary funds? And then third, the operational independence is a third type of independence that we think about when it comes to civilian oversight. So it is essential that the oversight body have the ability to make key decisions regarding their daily operations without consulting or requiring prior prior approval from outside entities. And so the authority, the oversight authority has to be able to carry out its mandate without seeking approval, such as initiating investigations, issuing subpoenas if they have subpoena power, just being able to carry out their mandates without delay and without unnecessary layers. Clearly define adequate jurisdiction and authority. That simply refers to knowing what you're doing, what you're allowed to do, what kind of cases you can look at, what kind of authorities are outlined in the ordinance, if there's a memorandum of understanding, just being very clear about what you're allowed to do, okay? So there should be a level of authority that enables successful performance and duties to the greatest degree possible without limitation, right? Allow the oversight body to do what it's supposed to do. Adequate and clearly defined jurisdiction and authority in writing is really important, okay? If you have clearly defined jurisdiction and authorities, it can minimize confusion and it can minimize the different types of interpretations between different bodies, right? I've seen many cities be stalled for years because of a difference in understanding, difference in interpretation of something in the ordinance or a memorandum of understanding. And so the entire community becomes very frustrated when that is the case. So it is important to be as clear as possible and have that in writing. There does have to be a balancing act when it comes to being clear and putting things in writing. Because whether it's by ordinance, memorandum of understanding, the language should be broad enough to allow for degrees of operational flexibility. But at the same time, the language should not be so broad that it results in conflicting interpretations. So that does require a balancing act and some skill in order to get the language right. Okay. Third, the stakeholders should be prepared to resolve issues regarding the oversight body's authority and then legislation is necessary. This is a standard and usual part of the process when it comes to oversight and the legislating authority. As a matter of fact, some cities that we work with, they actually build into their strategic plan a 3-year or 4-year or 5-year review where they intentionally stop and take a look at what they're doing. They actually build that in, so they intentionally take a look and do a self-evaluation of how things are going. How is the work going? Does the ordinance or the charter or the legislative authority provide enough authority in order so that they can carry out their mandate? During this time, they also build in feedback from the community, some mechanism to get feedback from the community. Because again, oversight is a process that should involve the community as a whole, and oversight exists in many ways to represent the interests of the community. Yes, yes, yes. Go ahead.
Darrell Williams arrives at 5:57 p.m. I'm actually not going.
You're close now. Okay, keep going. Thank you. Sorry. Well, no worries, no worries. Yeah. So yeah, so this is a usual process and some cities and counties actually build it into their timeline to make sure that they take a look at what's going on. The reality is with the work of oversight, you're not going to know if your legislative authority or even your MOU, if there is an MOU in place between your the oversight agency and the police department. You're not going to know how effective it is or if it's working right until you've gone through a few years at minimum. Right? And so just like any process, a built-in evaluation and an opportunity to make improvements and tweaks is standard and minimal. All right, unfettered access to records. This is pretty important when it comes to civilian oversight. All right. Now, the level of access to records is going to be dependent on the different oversight functions that an oversight office has. But essentially, in a nutshell, whatever the oversight functions are, the oversight body should have the minimum requirements in terms of information access to meet their mandate. So, for example, if someone is tasked with investigating a case, right? You've got investigators in your office. The investigators should have access to relevant information in order, that's needed to conduct an investigation. So that's documents, files, access to witnesses, everything that's needed to conduct an investigation. In the case, if there's responsibilities to audit or monitor investigations or other aspects of the law enforcement agency, that requires a higher level of access or a broader level of access to information. So in addition to accessing information similar to what investigators would need, it goes to a broader, much broader access. So that would include training materials. It could include, and I know there are laws in many states which guide what information is available when it comes to law enforcement, what can be disclosed. So anything that I'm talking about is going to be priority, always is abiding by whatever is allowed by law. So just want to preface that with what I'm saying. All right, but essentially, different levels or different functions of oversight should guide what the oversight agency has access to, the types of information. Oversight agencies that have access or the direct access can reduce delays in investigations and reduce the burdens of law enforcement. And so the delays in investigations, yes.
Authority member Michael Fontaine arrives at 6 p.m. We have a forum.
Thank you. Okay, so the direct unfettered access reduce delays in investigations. And so the investigator can actually access the file themselves. They don't have to put in a request to the law enforcement to provide that information. It also reduces the burden of law enforcement. I have heard some law enforcement officers talk about the amount of work they have, and that this is just another layer or another task that they have to do. And so by virtue of having direct unfettered access or direct access to information, that would eliminate that burden for them. Direct access also allows the oversight body to evaluate complete sets of records, data, files directly. So if, say, for example, if your office has the ability to conduct investigations, but they don't have direct access or unfettered access to records, then they're relying on information to be given to them by the law enforcement agency. And so that may not be a complete set of information, it may be selected information. And so how do you conduct a complete and thorough investigation if you don't have the complete access to everything that's available to conduct a complete and thorough investigation? And then clearly define the what and how early on. So ideally, what an oversight body can access, the mechanisms, the processes for accessing that information is determined early on, okay? And also there are specific timeframes that are determined as well. And so if you're operating without timeframes when it comes to accessing information, then cases could drag on. And so you definitely want to consider having timeframes in place. Let's see. And just a little bit of information, oversight agencies can secure access to department records, law enforcement agency records and information through one or more ways. It can be authorized in the enabling legislation. And so when we had a researcher did some research for us out of Denver, but he looked at the 58 largest oversight bodies in this country and found that 47% had an enabling legislation in their ordinance or their charter, which authorized access, direct access to department records and information. 33% of those 58 had memorandum of understanding in place or an agreement between the oversight office and the police department. And then 50% of those 58 had policy, the police department actually had a policy that, outlined the direct access of the oversight agency to their information. Now, those numbers, if you were doing the math, they equal to more than 100, and that's because quite a few of the cities, out of these 58 cities, they actually had more than one, they ensured direct access in more than one ways. So for example, a city had an ordinance that enabled, direct access to law enforcement records and information. But then they also developed a memorandum of understanding between the police department and the oversight agency. So in those cases, there are quite a few cities that ensure the direct access by multiple ways. So cities that, just as examples, cities that have unfettered access, Portland, Oregon, the New Orleans Office of the Independent Police Monitor, Denver's Office of the Independent Monitor, and New York's CCRB. The point being, this is not unusual, and it is an effective practice because it eliminates a lot of delays and a lot of layers and a lot of questioning whether or not the complete information is being received if direct access is not there. The thing about having direct access, a lot of oversight agencies, especially those that are, have investigators and have auditing and monitoring functions, they have direct access to, iPro is like one of the databases that police departments use. And so they do have access. Their access is time stamped. So people can't just go in there whenever they want, right? There can be permission levels set on what types of access someone can have. There it's logged, you can see who logged on, what time, what information they access. So it's not a free for all. It's very intentional and thought out about what can be accessed. And then just another graphic to show the percentage of out of the 64 largest cities with civilian oversight mechanisms in place. This shows the type of access that they have. And so you'll see that of the 64 agencies, 68 or 69% have unfettered access by ordinance or charter. And then 70% of those 64 agencies, those oversight agencies, have access to internal affairs records. So again, that's 100% because it's looking at some agencies that have access to both internal affairs, but also other types of information as well. This is just another graphic that shows what types of information oversight agencies have access to. And I know this is a lot of information on this one slide, so I will point something out to you. The review focused oversight bodies, or if that's the primary function of the oversight officer body, they're reviewing cases, they're going to have less access to the amount of information because they're simply reviewing cases. I shouldn't say simply, they're reviewing cases, so they don't need access to the level that an investigator might need, okay? So when you go to the investigative focus and the auditor / monitor focus columns, you'll see higher percentages in some areas because their level, their responsibility requires a higher level of access. So that goes back to the functions of the oversight office is going to determine the access to what types of files and records. So front end and back end access. I don't know if I said this when I mentioned IOPRO or different types of databases that law enforcement agencies use. Front end access refers to, well, if an oversight agency has front end access to one of these databases, they can query searches, they can run reports, summaries of various types of investigations. But if they have back-end access, that means that they can do a little bit more sophisticated types of analysis with them that they have access to. And that does help out with identifying patterns and trends. So a part of the responsibility of the oversight entity is to identify patterns and trends and policies and practices. Back-end access, does become helpful. Again, levels of permission can be set, and any access to any of the information is always documented. Okay, recommended access by authority. So this slide and the next slide, yes, I looked at the authorities that different oversight agencies have. And at minimum, list what types of data they should have access to do the work most effectively that they're mandated to do. For reviewing completed internal affairs investigations, it's ideal if the review, those reviewing the cases have access to the complete internal affairs investigation, body worn camera and in-car camera footage, radio transmissions and dispatch records, public policy documents and manuals, use of force reports, and subject officers training records. And again, if any of this is not allowed by law, I'm speaking generally, what are the effective practices? If an oversight agency is tasked with conducting investigations, then there's the list to the right, the same types of footage, roll call officer assignment records, use of force reports, cell phone records and footage, radio transmission and dispatch records, stop, search and arrest records, training records, and if there's subpoena power, the ability to compel an officer to appear for an interview and to obtain other evidence. There are quite a few oversight entities that do have subpoena power.
Can I do that?
Sure.
Do you have a number on how many, and there's several, but is there like a number that you have on top of your head that?
Not exact number. So one of the challenges that we currently have with having exact numbers like that is right now, there's not one database or data source that has all of the information and authorities that the oversight agencies in the country have. Our association did up until 2021. We had an interactive database. It was fully accessible by the public. Anybody could go to it. And any oversight agency that existed in the country, it was totally voluntary for them. They could upload all the information and they could identify what their authorities were. Whether or not they had subpoena power. However, that system, I'm not an IT person, something broke within the database. So we are actually working with some IT consultants now and should have that up and running this year. We'll have a better idea sometime this year.
So what are the differences between?
Yes.
I'm sorry,
I'm really sorry, because there's two public meetings going on, there are two agendas, neither one of the agendas has a public comment section, so unfortunately, we can't let the public speak. I'm sorry, it's a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
After this ends. Okay, so the other, so the first two, reviewing and investigation were two of the primary authorities granted to oversight agencies. And so another one is the monitoring and auditing, investigations or monitoring and auditing other aspects of law enforcement agencies. So when it comes to monitoring and auditing investigations, you can see in the left column, at minimum, monitors should have access to open internal investigation, the evidence of investigative plans, ongoing interviews in real time, and any other materials necessary for investigation. So monitors are actually monitoring open cases.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry to interrupt, I can't see you, so I couldn't.
Oh, sorry.
We have at this table, I'm not sure if you're aware, we have some tremendous expertise and like a long history of community organizing, even to make para a functioning body, and we've got some amendments that are in front of us right now. I wonder, and I'm a little bit anxious about running out of time, so I wonder if there's not a moment to just like open up. And have a little bit more of a discussion with the expertise that's here in this room, and since we have you between board members. And council members, if there's just a little bit more, it's already been 45 minutes and we're not even halfway, so I'm just anxious about time. Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we have some time to like really get to share the expertise and hear from you and like get into some of our local situations, you know, and conversations.
Sure, should I, okay, yeah, I thought I was just, I had like 2 hours, I didn't realize this. Okay, I'm happy to do whatever you want.
If folks would rather, you know, we just keep going with the presentation, that's okay, but I know this definitely feels like very familiar to me, I'm assuming.
Well, I
it's
don't
very
make any
familiar
assumptions that
in the room.
anybody that everyone in the room is fully versed in all this, because I do understand, having been familiar with civilian oversight and law enforcement, first as a member of my community who worked for 2 years to get oversight established by ordinance, and also now in my role as the director of training and education, I'm still learning a great deal. I learn every day what I thought I knew about oversight that I didn't know, and even more. So I make no assumptions about what anybody in this room knows.
Yeah, this background information has been tremendous. It's been very helpful. I think to the council president's point, if we can talk about like the contextual stuff here in Providence, that would be very helpful. There's, to the council president's point, there's a lot of
Okay.
great expertise, and I'm sure people are chomping at the bit to get at some of the nitty gritty. So
Yeah, and again, if folks aren't, you know, I just wanted to make sure that we had that opportunity, because there is, between the para board members and council, there's like a lot of knowledge and like desire for para to be a fully functioning effective body
So
here
where
at
to
the table.
Where would you like me to address?
yeah,
I'm sorry, we can't take public comment, but Councilman Harris.
Yeah, I'm very interested in, what you think. I know you've read out on policy, what we have in place. And you mentioned some of the things that was strengthened, or some of the things that others have had, that have been able to bring it to a place where, you know, like you say, it is either functioning or it's being challenged, or whatever the case may be. I'm interested in knowing, what we have here in Providence, what we could do better, how we could, you know, maybe actually give it the energy that the community needs. I know a lot of oversights that you have visited. I know they have had challenges a lot where there is no doubt it's been around, but still have a disconnection from the community. So I'm interested in knowing, you know, some of what you experienced in that, and how these cities have overcome these different challenges. And I have other things too. I'm just gonna start with that, because we, like the council president said, we're very much interested in making sure that what we have, we're doing our best, you know, as colleagues here, to be able to do what we have to do.
Okay, so it
We
would be helpful
improve our
to me
ordinance.
if you could be a little more targeted when you talk about the issues that are here, so.
Okay, we operate on the ordinance.
Yes.
Okay, so you broke it down between the difference in an ordinance and a charter, and how those things get changed. So we operate on the ordinance. What I mean is, like, what you seen that we have, what is it that we can do to strengthen our oversight? I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, let me pull up let's see. Have the proposed amendments to the existing ordinance. And
I'm sorry, Dina, and I guess if I can.
Sure, absolutely.
Are there any amendments that are preempted by the police bill of rights? I don't know if that's.
You're familiar with Rhode Island.
Right.
I know,
I don't want to get into that,
Okay.
but that's an area that I would leave to the legal counsel, who are more versed in, yes. Each officer bill of rights looks different by state to state, so I don't,
Okay. Understood.
but when you look at the amendments, there are specific things to the
That's right,
council
yeah.
person's point that you think would strengthen the work that's currently being done by para?
I do think that, so one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the proactive approach to doing things, being not just reactive to some.
For the members of the public, those amendments will be introduced, in probably not this next meeting, but shortly, and it will be made like available to the public as soon as they're officially in the, city council.
Well, maybe if I start by saying this, when I reviewed the proposed ordinance, I didn't see any of the proposed changes that I thought, oh, no, that's okay, that's not actually going to make this a more effective oversight body. I do think that if the idea of moving from not just being a reactionary body to an incident that occurs, or, someone files an allegation of police misconduct, to being more proactive and doing more of the auditing and monitoring, I think that is, an effective way to identify any possible, or potential flaws in policies or practice, or areas that, might benefit from some type of change. And if you're doing that proactively, theoretically, it can prevent something from happening, something negative from happening because of a flawed policy or something else. I do think having, direct access to information and records, and that was one of the things that I was able to do. I think that actually would strengthen oversight, and again, for the reasons that I mentioned. And hopefully, like with the data, the charts, it's not an unusual thing to have that, when you have investigators in your office, or your office has auditing and monitoring functions. I live in the real world. I know that there is resistance to that from law enforcement agencies, from the police union. And all I can say to that is, if you have a good understanding about oversight, this is not an anti-police, not an us against them. It's more about how do we ensure the best way possible as a community, not just an oversight agency, but as a community comprised of citizens, oversight professionals, city council members, activists, law enforcement. How do we ensure the safety and well-being of the community as a whole? And so historically, the internal investigations that have taken place by police officers when there's an allegation of police misconduct, it's an opaque process. And so the whole reason, or one of the main reasons that oversight exists in the country, was because of the desire and a need for transparency. We all know the history of this country. Most people probably know the history of policing in this country, especially when it comes to racial violence. I'm a realist. I don't shy away from the reality of things. And so that's going back to that Wickersham Commission in the 30s and the Kerner Commission in the 60s. The challenges that have come historically in this country when it comes to policing, and particularly policing certain communities, there's a reason why there have been calls for, from the federal level on down, for transparency and accountability when it comes to policing. And so, I guess overall, when it comes to having direct access to information, if the community, all stakeholders are aware that the oversight office in their investigation, they looked at data holistically, the complete, the file that was available, the complete investigation file, the data that was available. They could access it themselves. There's more trust in that process.
I have a question, and I'd love to hear from their board members too, but my question is, can you speak a little bit to like how, other oversight boards have kind of done best practices on community outreach? Because increasingly I find that people in the
Yes.
neighborhoods do not know that para
That's so
exists,
true.
like really at all.
Right.
And so I think, the efforts at like making the oversight board be an effective, policing strategy are minimized when no one knows that it's there to call on it. Yeah, so if, yeah.
This is something that a question I get a lot. And so I'll start by saying this. The ability and the feasibility to carry out, a lot of mandates, including community outreach. It requires resources in the terms of staffing and sometimes financially, to start with. For example, I don't even know how many staff are with para, but if it's a small office, they don't have someone dedicated to doing the community outreach and it's falling on them, then if they're having, other priorities, investigation, that's not gonna get done because it's not the highest priority. So ideally, there is appropriate staffing for that. There are a lot of communities that actually have a community engagement person or a position similar to that title. Community engagement is a very common term. And then that they can focus on that. And so when it comes to engaging the community, I'll say, a lot of oversight bodies do have challenges with bringing people to their meetings, not even just aware that they exist. So, a couple of things I've seen different communities do. One, if there's a board or commission, or whenever there's a meeting, they don't just have the meetings in the official city hall or the official place that meetings usually occur, but they actually rotate where the meetings occur throughout the city. So they go to different churches, they go to different community centers, they go to a school. And so they actually go into the neighborhoods and communities where they know that they're likely to get better participation by being there. And they can still live stream and they still follow public meeting laws. When it comes to increasing awareness in general, there are a few kind of very common things that some oversight agencies do. So they do table events at different community events. They can go out to speak to different organizations, whether it's nonprofit organizations, whether it's schools. I've seen tabling events at malls. The city of Atlanta, they do tabling event like every Saturday or one day a week, and they go to a mall, they educate the public who stops by the table. So there are a variety of things that can be done. But you might have to think outside the box. And also, so I talked earlier about, like one of the goals of oversight is to build bridges between the community and law enforcement agencies. So if there's opportunities to collaborate or host something, with a nonprofit agency or with some kind of, if there's a, I don't know if local government here ever does any types of functions, open houses or anything, but if there's an opportunity to collaborate with the oversight agency, or even with the police department. We do have organizations or oversight agencies that will co-host something. And so thinking of how the oversight agency can tap into what's already existing in the community and partnering with them for various things. It doesn't even have to be something that is specifically focused on, hey, we're oversight, this is what we do. By virtue of oversight, those involved in their oversight, by virtue of being visible in the community and working alongside or in collaboration with other agencies and other stakeholders, people will get to know you. It's human nature. People will start to ask, well, who are you and what do you do? And so any opportunities like that, whether it's specifically educating or increasing awareness about oversight, or that is going to be a byproduct of the collaboration or what you're doing in the community, can help out. I've seen some offices do an open house, right? So if someone, say there's a new staff member in the office, or there are new, commission members who are appointed, there's, say, like a 3 to 5 open house, where people can just come in, it's informal, to meet the new staff member or the new, commission member. And I understand your quorum can be an issue with, you know, a certain number of people in the same place at the same time, it has to be on the meeting laws. But in those cases, the example I gave, it could just be the new members who show up to an open house. So and I've seen a lot of creative stuff and a lot of standard stuff.
Madam,
Counselor.
I just, because you started out, I think that's what made me want to jump out with a question. You started out by saying being proactive in order to build that trust between the community. Is that what you mean by proactive? What you just, some of the ideas you just gave us, is that the proactive you're talking about, or is there a different type of proactive?
So that is proactive in terms of community, so
Community engagement.
two things, yeah, so
Okay.
with community engagement, it definitely is incumbent upon the agency to reach out to the community, right?
Mhm.
And it's going to be an ongoing process, because there are always going to be community members. You can have the best awareness program or a program to increase awareness about oversight in this community, and you can execute it. There are still gonna be segments of the community that don't know what oversight is, and it's okay, that they can learn about it, right? But the education program, the increasing awareness, that should be an ongoing thing. Now, Jen, earlier when I talked about being proactive as opposed to just reactive, I think I was speaking more about overall as an oversight agency, not just reacting to cases of alleged police misconduct and then coming in and doing an investigation, or coming in and, you know, being involved at that point. But being proactive in that regard means to audit, monitor kind of things going on in the police department. So ideally, catching any flaws or any potential problems so that they don't turn into a case where an incident happens or someone files a complaint allegation. Allegation of complaint. Yeah.
Susan, please, first, 2 questions. So, first getting back to the 13 principles.
Mhm,
And looking at the ordinance, the way it exists currently,
mhm.
what would be your top 5 recommendations to make that ordinance more effective based upon the 13 principles?
You know, I have to say, I didn't read the ordinance with doing that in mind, so I read it so I can have an understanding of what is being proposed and then prepare this. So I would hate to misspeak and just off the cuff tell you what those would be without really giving some time to think through that and redo this with that in mind. I jotted notes, but yeah,
I was to provide us a follow-up when you do that.
I absolutely can do that, yes, 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 yes. Yeah. But, let me see if there's anything that sticks out in my notes. I did put like the auditing function on. It's, I don't know, section, first section, number 6. Yeah, so there are things that really stand out and I took notes on. But yeah, I would want to take a closer look before I responded to that.
Can you recommend a follow-up, to this meeting? Secondly, policy recommendation, and as that being something that might be a proactive approach to some of the complaints that we get.
Mhm.
What is your feelings on that?
Yeah, most oversight agencies, even if they are only tasked with reviewing completed internal affairs investigations, and they have no authority to investigate or audit or monitor, are authorized to make policy recommendations. I think that is one of the most standard authorities, regardless of the function of an oversight agency, whether it's an all volunteer for the commission or if it's an office with paid staff. So that is pretty standard, and yes, it is, I'm definitely recommending to be able to do that.
Do you have any feeling as to, how often those policy recommendations are implemented by the police department?
That's gonna vary by city to city. I would say the model for implementation, I would say is Seattle. You can go on their website. They're the model in a lot of ways. They have and they're very, very transparent. Now I will say Seattle has multiple oversight bodies. And so they're very well funded and they have been around for a while. And so their working relationship with the police department is really, really good. So on their website, they actually have a recommendation tracker in addition to a complaint investigation tracker, two separate trackers. And so for their policy recommendation tracker, they actually list every single recommendation that is made. And they have a little key, like a legend with a check mark, an X mark, a yellow sign. But essentially, they list the recommendation, you can click on it to read the full recommendation or the summary of the case. And then they have a column, was it recommended? Or like the time frame, because they have time frame set, where in the process is this? And so I would say theirs is the model for how transparent you are, about making recommendations and also the transparency from the police department in responding. On that tracker, the police response is also tracked along with the police, not even whether or not the policy was implemented or not, but also the police department's justification or reasoning if they do not accept that recommendation. That, I don't know the percentage there, but they have a pretty decent, level of acceptance of their recommendations from the police department. But like I said, they've had a good working relationship for quite some time. Now other cities and oversight bodies, communities oversight are very frustrated with, the lack of changes or recommendations being accepted when it comes to policy recommendations. And in those cases, there's often the reality that there is nothing in the ordinance that requires an explanation of the decision to accept the policy or not. So ideally, in your legislation or a memorandum of understanding, if there is one that exists between the oversight agency and the police department, ideally, there is a requirement for the police chief to provide a justification or reasoning why the policy recommendation was not accepted. So that leads to the transparency of this entire process. I need to talk about things being opaque for so long. One of the goals is to be as transparent as possible. And I'll say this, it's not just transparency in the police department, but transparency of PARA too, the oversight body. The same expectation of transparency and accountability that we place on law enforcement, place it on ourselves too. Thank you.
Councilman Peterson.
Thank you. This is a question for para board members, actually, if that's okay. Do we have an MOU in place?
No.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. Should we is the next question. Actually, thank you for being here. My voice is coming in and out today. I'm sorry. I'm recovering from whatever it was that I had to do. I'm done, I promise. My question is around public reporting.
Yes.
And transparency. One of the things that I think, obviously, in an effort to navigate this in giving it, fulfilling its purpose in the way that it should.
Yes.
Is navigating this conversation around public reporting and transparency of what that looks like. And to the extent of what para does right now, I'm unfamiliar, so please forgive me, but I wonder if there's anything that we should be doing to highlight more or the complete opposite. In what should we be doing? What are key pieces that we should perhaps ensure that we're taking care of to not only maintain spirit of collaboration with the police department, but also give this the autonomy and the fairness that it deserves, for the public to also be supporting what we're trying to do in this process.
So the key thing about being transparent in public reporting is to provide as much information as you possibly can that you're legally allowed to. So that goes to everything from on your website. List the policies that you follow, list the checklist if you're reviewing a case, list the auditing checklist if you're auditing a case. Everything, list the ordinance, the legislation, whatever you can possibly put on the website so that the general public, anybody who's interested in finding out, well, what do they do? And how do they do it? They can go to that website and see, find some information there. So one, just make anything and everything available to the public, on the website that you possibly can, legally allowed to. When it comes to issuing reports, bare minimum, an annual report that, includes information about your mission, your purpose, those sorts of things, but then also provides information, data, how many complaints the office received, how many were investigated, what were the outcomes of the investigated. So everything that you all or parish should be tracking, or the office, pretty much all the work that you've done. Again, this goes to feasibility and resources and staff, having the staff to do this and the resources to do this. So I understand that. So I'm just giving you the ideal situation. But minimum annual report addressing those things, but also, so it's think in terms of two things, both related to civilian oversight of law enforcement and the whole reason that it exists. One, all the workings of the oversight in Providence, right? So tracking how many cases you get, the outcomes and all those sorts of things. And then two, if there's any information that is helpful to know in the context of oversight from the law enforcement agency. So for example, what many cities include in their annual reports are not just the misconduct information, but some information about the data that's provided by law enforcement as far as uses of force, arrests, traffic violations. And so looking at those sorts of things. So that's at the bare minimum. What is also helpful to have, and I don't know enough about Providence and just what happens here, but there are various cities that do special reports. And so if there's one, for example, I'm thinking, I know some cities will periodically conduct some kind of town hall meeting or listening session or distribute a survey in some way to get community input about their perception of oversight. Is it effective? What do they want oversight to be focusing on? And so they conduct those surveys, listening sessions, whatever it is, and they issue drafted reports and issue that. So that again, and then put that on the website so that everyone's aware this is part of the work that they're doing, that we're doing. If there's a critical incident that happens or some kind of case that rises to a higher concern in the community or by oversight of law enforcement than most of the others. If there's a special look into that particular incident, some cities will do a special report on a particular incident that is it's something that the community is very concerned about. Another example of a special report, I know that one city, they had quite a few police police pursuits that ended up in one death and a few like major accidents or major injuries to people. And so they convened different listening sessions, where they got community input about what they would like to see regarding the police pursuit policy. So this is a policy recommendation that was made with input from the community. And so based on the feedback from the community, they actually political report, and it was a part of the policy recommendation that was made to change the police pursuit policy. It actually was accepted, in that case. So special reports, but I think that in a nutshell, anything and everything that you can provide, provide it. And I will say this too, if there are challenges that para is experiencing, that, be very transparent with the community about what those challenges are and why they exist. Now, this is not you all, this is like, I'm thinking of a particular city we're working with that they had a backlog that extended a couple years. Community was outraged. Communication was poor, why that was happening. New staff came in, like new head of the agency, and has spent the last several months, doing a, pretty much like a public image campaign and, communication, a lot of communicating with the public about what's going on. And the community appreciates that. So you all know, if there's something, a challenge going on, if there's a community perception that the oversight agency isn't doing what it's supposed to do, whether they know what that is or not, being transparent about that and having conversations about that is the best thing to do. So essentially, don't shy away, like we all fall short at some point or another or have challenges. Don't sweep them under the rug, don't act like they don't exist, because if you don't address them, if you're not transparent about them with the community, then you're gonna take a hit on your, how they view you as a legitimate organization.
That's right.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to ask Barron's, just give him 2 minutes, to explain the database that we have, or has public information.
Clarence is not a member of para, I would love to, so just to like,
Yeah.
not highlight it for me also.
Yeah.
I would love though, so, one thing, you know, since we're at this table together, there are, I think it's like a pretty pivotal moment and it's a little bit now or never in terms of rebuilding trust with the community. Between para, there's 2 ordinances that govern para, right? There's the ordinance, the initial one that set para, but then there's also the Community Safety Act. Right? And looking at para's website, you can't access either of those, right? Like even, there's a huge amount of data that is, enshrined in law in the Community Safety Act, the city's not doing it. Right, so to the extent that like all of us have a stake in figuring out how we can use para to, I really appreciated your frame of like making policing, you know, more strategic, more effective, more engagement with community, like we all have a stake in that. And I have always been really invested in that. Councilwoman Harris has been invested since the first day of trying to make para a reality, right? And many other councilors and other folks at this table like really want to see that to the best of its function. I would absolutely offer the resources of council, like if we ever wanted to do something where we were actively soliciting community feedback on policy, on the community safety, I'm sorry, the proper name of the Community Safety Act.
Yeah, I liked it when it was community safety.
Yeah.
It was short, right to the point.
I cannot remember.
PCPR. The PCPR, I don't know what that stands for, but I know that's the acronym.
Oh, good, right, you're good.
That's okay. So like, I think that like, this is a great opportunity for us. I really appreciate you being here and like sharing your expertise.
Yeah.
But I think like, it also needs to be like a little bit of a shot for us to like collectively, get our act together and work together to be a lot more outward facing, because that is, you know, from my, the conversations that I've had with people, both who are like newer in the city and are aware of oversight happening, you know, in other places, and people who are lifetime residents of the city of Providence, is disappointment. The number one feeling on like there was a lot of energy and a lot of passion that went into passing both ordinances, para and the Community Safety Act. And, you know, we've had a lot of iterations of staff. We've had a lot of iterations of, you know, different, folks in city government who were maybe not big fans of it. But right now, this is the group of people who want to see this work,
Right.
right? Like
Exactly.
more than anything. So,
Well, then if I can ask the support of the council in endorsing some of the amendments that we're making to this ordinance.
we're gonna introduce them and we're gonna go through
Yes.
the process, yep.
And very much appreciated, because right now we do not have unfettered access. We have submitted I believe it's 7, policy change recommendations that have not been implemented or responded to. So to have your support in doing the work that we've been very hard at work doing is very much appreciated.
For sure, and communicate like with us, I'd love to know the policy recommendations, and there's like a broader conversation to have, while totally respecting your independence, right? Like, there's a broader conversation and collaboration to have, that's just not there.
Unfortunately, the information's not somehow getting down to you, because we have sent over those policy recommendations anytime that we have passed them. So maybe that's a
And we should
communication
put
issue
them
that we
on our website, make them available for the whole public.
I definitely do, yeah.
Yeah.
Or that's one of the things. Um,
Councilman?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you haven't spoken.
It's a couple quick plugs, I hope. One, I know when I got on the board, I helped to draft some of the amended language for the ordinance. Please be aware that these were in mind when I added my comments. So like, we were trying to do what Nate was doing. The one thing that I'm very interested in is maybe selfish plug, because this is what my background is in, but is the access to data widespread, right? So never mind the access to officers' records and that unfettered access, but also things like number of stops or number of arrests in different communities, where are the locations, who's working where, under policing. My neighborhood suffers from a lot, like, we are constantly asking for more police to be around at every neighborhood meeting, right? And we have the skills on the board to be able to do that and show those things, and I think what I'm feeling is a little bit of like a chicken and an egg problem. I want to be able to have that data and that report and bring it to a meeting and say, here are our flyers, this is what we're seeing, your neighborhood is getting too much policing, you might be getting not enough, right? But like, I think, not to speak for the whole board, but myself, it's hard to be able to go out to the community and say, hey, pay attention to us, if we don't have some of that stuff done. So it is like very much a kind of circular problem. And to reiterate, our board chair, board, I always get it wrong. But Susan's point is that we do need your support. So that is my plug. But also if we have time, I'd love to hear more if you any experience with like those kind of data things as being helpful for the community. Because like, I would love to have our own internal report about stops, right? The police department publishes some stuff. It's not a lot. And a lot of cities have that very expansive public information, but we don't.
Right, and she took the slide down, but it was in the bottom right corner, the last bullet was the access, and you don't have to pull that up, but it was the access to data sets, so that you can do robust and your own analysis. So this is actually something that some of the communities, some of the oversight boards and commissions and offices that I have been working with have been requesting this from their law enforcement agencies for quite some time. There are some larger agencies, Philadelphia, the major cities where they have access to data sets, and the oversight offices have these data analysts, policy analysts who actually have a data set and they can do their own analysis. Smaller communities don't typically have that access. And it's not necessarily they can't, it's just, I don't know, I can't think of one smaller community outside the major cities that have that access. But it actually is a part of oversight, and so many oversight agencies in their ordinance, by their legislative authority, mention, and I can't say if yours does, but mention the purpose of oversight, or one of the purposes is to address some of the policing issues in the community that historically have existed. And so one way to do that is with data, right? And so a lot of police departments that I'm aware of in the work that I do They might provide the traffic stops, the use of force, and, three of them, the third one's escaping me, but they usually provide, raw number arrests, thank you. And they will provide some demographics, like race, ethnicity, gender, those sorts of basic levels of demographics. And they provide, raw numbers and percentages. And so if anybody is a data person or really likes to get into the numbers like me and really like that, you understand that that information is helpful to have and it does tell you something. But what you really need to understand are the rates when it comes to those issues. And so that's one of the areas where the communities that I've been working with that have been requesting data sets, and you can scrub the data, so there's no personal identifying, but they would love to get their hands on the data set so that they can do some analysis. And so, the law enforcement agencies in those communities, we're thinking about specifically, they are concerned about turning over data, even if it's scrubbed. But they also say that it adds another task, that is time intensive to an officer to be able to generate that data. So it's, so,
But what if, like, Tara can do it?
right, well, that's the best case scenario, that's a part of the unfettered access, because if a part of what you're doing is monitoring, and identifying patterns of practice, that are, can be problematic to a community, data, right? That's one way to do it. If you have someone who understands data, can understand how to query the database, calculate rates, because that's where you really get the pattern, that's where you get the trend, that's the true story. Then yes, that is actually a very helpful thing to have.
A few months ago, we were able to activate our database, so there is a lot of information that's being input. So when we do get some aggregate information, it's going to be able to spit out, it's going to be able to spit out the demographic data, any officers that may have, a red flag in our system. So we'll be able to produce a lot of our own data over the course of time. And these are public portals.
And when it comes to this, again, I have to reiterate, this isn't like trying to find fault in anything a police department is doing. It's identifying patterns and understanding, like, okay, this might be an area that we need to look at and to understand what's going on here. For the overall safety and well-being of the community. And so I just think of, and I know it's, again, I'm a realist, but I'm not living in this fantasy world. But I do think that their concerted effort to have collaborative relationships is important. And I know that that is not always the easiest thing to do off the bat when people don't know each other. So, yeah, just operating with integrity and being transparent with all stakeholders and including law enforcement about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it can benefit the community as a whole. Are good things to point out.
Yeah, I first of all, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for really expressing the sincereness of this state, of this community, of Providence, Rhode Island, for its creation of the oversight. Most of these people that came in as a community also were a part of that. So when you talk about history, you're talking about people who have historically stuck around to see this, to see it succeed. The community is not against it. The community wants it to work. It was a part of what the community did to create it. It was not created by politicians. It was not. It was created by community. And when the community created it, the politicians seen the need because the community, that was something the community needed, you know what I mean? And they see the need to put together. So I want to thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your passion. I want to thank the council president for bringing up history of why it's so important for us to have this and that it goes right and that it, that we keep it. We had it since 2002. A lot of oversights, even the one that came here, Minneapolis, was not even in existence. They came here to testify on the behalf of why we should have the civilian oversight in the creating of it. Then it's been around, it had funding, but it never operated, never operated. First, it went to court, had its procedure and course. We are where we are today because we was able to say because of the way it was created, it can operate. So I think sitting here and listening to different things, and I'm thinking about the oversight and its responsibility to take the complaints, investigate the complaints, and then have a hearing. And also do policy review. Thinking about that, that might be, in a creative mind, when the community created it, they wanted to be a holistic board working autonomous from the city period and being able to have its own independence to do whatever. However, that might be stacked too much. I don't know, but that might be a little too big of a stack. Maybe we should pick a direction and decide on whether the civilian oversight should go, where it can make the difference in people's lives. Because I'm surprised to hear that a lot of the people who come before this board don't realize who brought harm towards them. Because in the creation of it, Councilwoman, as you can remember, people would tell names of these officers. They definitely did. And so it was no secret to who were out there overstepping the boundaries. It's a difference in balling up paper and throwing it in somebody's face and insulting them than actually punching them once you do it. You know what I mean? Throw paper in people's face, throw up a ticket in his face. It's just like, sometimes people just say, I just want an apology. But if you punch me, you're gonna pay for my doctor bill some way or the other, So it's a difference in what abuse is and who overdo it. And we have an officer here who knows. There have been quite a few people who had to leave that Providence Police Department. I know we on record, and I don't want to talk to you too much. I don't violate that. But that we're overdoing what they're supposed to do. But because of the civilian oversight, I think it brought a lot of attention. But that was then. Now we really want this thing to work. We've been investing a lot of money into this machine, and we would like to see it work. So I think at the end of the day, is it too stacked? That's why I started out by asking you, have you read it? And did you read it and say, oh, this is just normal? That's what other oversights have. They do the same exact thing. Yeah. I don't think we had a hearing in ever. Maybe one. We had one hearing that brought it to court. One hearing that got it in court for the judge to rule in favor of oversight. It's only one hearing.
Okay.
That I remember.
So do you feel like it's too much? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm asking. I don't know, because all these years it has not got its steam. And a lot of it may be because not having access to records. But then you have the community who's saying, I'm not going there, they don't do anything. And when you send somebody to the oversight and they say, they feel that kind of way, then we got two things going on here. We got the not access to the records that they need or the information they may need. And then we got the community who say, they're not gonna do anything or whatever, or I heard from so-and-so. So I think it's two things going on here as we're creating the database. I've always said there has to be a type of community engagement. You have mentioned so many creative ways because we have so many different agencies that work really close. We're a close community. Providence is very close. We all know each other. And these agencies will work to be able to work with Para, to give some of these community forums, right? Because they already have people who are already in their organizations anyways. So you've given a lot of how we can do the community, which I'm very passionate about. You've given us a lot of ideas on just a matter of when do we do it, or do we just concentrate on this one area that we've been concentrating on? oh, we're not getting the information, so the database and all of this stuff, but in the meantime, you have to. So,
Right. As far as the community aspect and what you just expressed, the community side, not the access to information side. Have you all done any type of survey or targeted requests for feedback about the frustration or the lack of whatever is going on?
oh, have the parent board done that? You have to know the community,
Or the
anybody
council.
about
or the
that.
council.
But the council.
Or any,
No, we try to give the space, para has para has his own life, right? We don't try to, to tell para even what to do, right? But we do know, we hear from our constituents.
yeah.
I live in my area, Upper South Providence and the south side of Providence. I constantly hearing people who have had issues, whether they're good or bad or whatever. I send them to para. I believe in para, so I say, go to para.
And Counselor.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, well, I just wanted to synthesize what you were saying, because I think it's a really good point, is so you're saying basically like, there's all this stuff here that's being presented. And it's a lot. And so if we had to extrapolate or just limit it to the main priority that's achievable in the immediate future, like what is that thing? So we can be laser focused on that thing, so we're not biting off too much more than we can chew. And so I think
it's both. I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
The being able to get to the records, access to records and building that relationship some way or the other, whether it's bringing in the community to do it through what you said, working with the stakeholders, letting the stakeholders know, look, I'm being transparent about, this is what we're going through. And having the community itself have its own conversation with our police department, which we have always had conversations with our police department. That's one thing we can say, we're not like other states. Our police talk to us.
Yeah.
Our chiefs talk to us. And they come out and am I wrong?
They've been.
Our
community meetings.
Yeah, I mean, and
So
this
like-
has been a while. This has been a
Yeah.
long time, right?
Yeah.
In our city. So we have, we have access to building something better, like, you know what I mean? It's how we do it. And I think you've came up with some really creative things that you said, but
Mhm.
I think it's both. I think building that way to get access to the information they need once they get the community there. Is why build a relationship with the community. They all rush there and they still stop. I think it's both, but we need to.
And from your opinion, like if you were to say like, what's 1, 2, and 3?
So
What would you
to-
say, you know?
Okay.
To answer that in an informed way,
Mhm.
that's, you're getting into like coming up with a strategic plan to address where. to
That's what we
start
need.
where you are. And so to say 1, 2, 3, for me, without fully understanding the context of Providence. I understand a little bit about the history of the website here and there, but I would need much more information
Mhm.
in order, because you're really talking about what it sounds like you need a 1 year, a 3-year, 5-year plan. And as a part of that, I can like, the principles are priorities, but you can't do everything at once. And so you all would have to determine, like, you have to have strategic planning sessions and determine what the priorities are. And then number those priorities.
Is that something we're envisioning as, I think that sounds like a great idea, but is that something that should be just para, or is that?
Well,
I think we can work
there's
together.
real value in the independence of para. I think that we will forever provide feedback on things that you all come up with, like, we're very happy to be in conversation. But Councilwoman Peterson had her hand up.
no, I didn't.
Okay. Anyone else? So we are at a little past an hour and a half, which is my understanding of what this meeting was supposed to be. I have a question just about funding. Like, are there any other oversight boards that are successful in seeking out private funding? Does anyone go that route? Does anyone, like, is that part of the deal?
No, not that Nicole is aware. We've had this question before. Every oversight entity that we are in contact with and aware of, which are most of them, their funding is through the local municipality. We're not aware of any that have any private funding. No.
I wonder if that's also like an avenue to start exploring, especially as we're in a budget year that we know is gonna be pretty extreme. Not that, yeah, anyway, I will always advocate for funding for para as well. So I'm trying to signal, but like in terms of increased access, which we're talking about like some of these independent functions, I wonder if that's also a path.
Whatever I'm sorry, to interrupt, but whatever the funding is, ideally it is, it's not a one-time thing and it just doesn't disappear.
Sure.
Because, yeah, that is true. I think it's when you're looking at foundations or private funding, I know sometimes there are limits on.
How many years?
Yeah.
Any other one?
No, I will say this though, I think, and this would be up to our director and council chair in terms of the powers that the board actually has. For me being on this over the years, I know there's been frustration with the feeling that oftentimes you go hand in hand saying, can I have this information? You don't get a response. You don't get anything. And then I think that's what the problem is. Is people do come and say, well, what's going on in the case? What? We haven't got this yet. You know, and then the frustration with that. So I just think that, you know, whatever the council can do, and thank you, because I know directly you've been instrumental in bringing this forward 5 years ago. So thank you.
I'm only 45, so how in the heck? Thank you. It's all good.
No, I really appreciate it. No, I think that's,
Thank you.
sorry, it's my private prayer, but I think that was very insightful. We did that back then, but I think to make your vision actually reach fruition is the power that we have to go in and say, hey, listen, we need this and we need it now. We need it within 2 weeks and actually get those documents. I think that would make a huge difference. And like you're saying, data is so important. So if we get that data, we can get those documents. I think we could actually make a real difference to the community and affect policing in a positive way for everyone. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Just a point of additional information, we are gonna have 4 cases that are gonna be coming to a hearing, based upon our investigator. That's how we did it at our last meeting, so.
Okay, that'd be, please keep us informed, because I think, again, about transparency. I'm sorry. to speak. Okay, transparency is the fact that the council itself is here. We're here to support and help as much as we can, especially with entities that we believe in. That's something that we have to create. We want to see it work. However, you have to let us know things that's going on. I feel like I asked this question before and got a little frustrated. I do get frustrated doing the same thing over and getting the same result. I got a little frustrated because I felt like we didn't have enough information on what's been going on, but things are being asked of us, right? I don't know whether that is every now and then send us. I know you're getting better at reports, but at the time, I felt like, wait a minute, I just don't know what's going on. I don't even know how to defend it. Even when people come with, you know, the people who still oppose it, right? Even when they come and talk about it, I don't know how to defend it. I don't know how, and I'm sure a lot of the council people feel the same way, because we don't have enough information. So transparency should start with us as well.
Yeah.
And then, and then the community definitely needs to know. Like you said, even some of the things that you're struggling with, and you'd be surprised how many people will be there to support what they believe in, right? They believe that we should have an alternative to filing complaints. Another, you know, just not one way of filing, but an alternative to it. And I believe you will get the help. I'm leaving here tonight hoping this is it. I'm sorry. This is very important because we all care about the civilian oversight. We all really do here in this city. And I believe that we want to see it work. I believe the frustration I have is frustration that everyone has. Has nothing to do with the board that has been established in your work and you guys that have come aboard. But this has been years, but you guys are taking some of the, you know what I mean? Some of that, you're bringing some of that with, even though you're new on the board, you know what I mean? A lot of that comes with the fact that it's been around so long and we're still talking about, get the information. Can't get the information. I mean, I really like to see it work, and I want to say again, thank you again for coming, and thank you for the work you do, and thank you for going and encouraging oversight boards to stand strong and continue, because I believe we should have that alternative to filing complaints. Thank you, President.
Thank you. Anyone else before we close? Like to say anything? Dr. Barr, is there anything you'd like to say? It's your.
Just offer a little bit of hope. We've worked with cities and oversight entities that were ripe with challenges and their legitimacy, their standing in the community and taking major hit. Where it felt, hopeless. But with intentional thought given to how to get that legitimacy back, coming up with a plan, and like really do not stay on the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plans. It can be turned around. It can be turned around.
I just wanna, again, thank you in support of some of the amendments that we're gonna be proposing to the ordinance. And if you go onto our website, you will see those recommendations that we've made to the police department, and that's a great suggestion that we added. Hopefully we can add this to the database that it can be tracked, so that would be interesting. But just to see, the portal that's there, just kind of navigate around and see the information that we'll be able to pull out at some point, so.
Thank you. Logistically, do you want to adjourn para and then we'll adjourn city council?
Motion. So, second.
Somebody make it. All like, who made it?
I'll make it.
Like seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstained? We are adjourned.
All right, and now we need a motion to adjourn city council.
No, we don't have a quorum, so you
We
can.
can just leave. Thank you, Tina. We don't have to do the extra work.